We are on air. Today is Thursday, April 2nd. This is a meeting on community outreach for Backdrop CMS. And let's take a minute to go around and have everybody say what's your name, where you're from, and if there's anything else you want to share with us quickly today that's not on the agenda. So let's start with Luke.
All right, I'm Luke McCormick. I'm in Danville, California, outside of San Francisco Bay Area. I've been Drupaling for 10 years and backdropping for 5. and I'm happy to lend a hand whenever there's something from sort of my marketing administrative background that seems relevant.
I'll go ahead. I'm Tim. I'm St. Paul Tim, reporting to you from northern Minnesota, near Deerwood, Minnesota. Prior to the meeting, I tried showing some deer grazing in the backyard, but I missed them. Just a fun fact, I just checked the Backdrop usage statistics, and we just crossed 1,200 sites for the first time. The stats jump up and down a little bit, but the number's like 1,236 this week, which is the first time we've been above 1,200.
That's great.
Cool.
Matthias, do you want to go next?
Matthias?
Yeah.
You want to introduce yourself next?
Oh, sure. I'm Matthias from Switzerland. I create marketing websites using Backdrop for small businesses and focus on front-end development. I'm not a Backdrop developer. Front-end development and creating content. And I have a marketing background as a professional marketing background. And I hope to be useful in this group.
Yeah, I'm sure you will be very useful in this group. Joseph, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, I'm Joseph from Las Vegas, Nevada. And yeah, I'm a backend developer.
All right, so Matthias, what we usually do in this meeting, I think you might have been at our last one, is sort of go down a to-do list of things that we think will help spread the word about Backdrop, but none of us have marketing or branding or any kind of experience that would help in that area. So we're mostly just guessing at the things we think we should be doing. So if there's anything that's not in this agenda that you think we should be doing, or anything that we need to prioritize that we aren't, we're definitely all open to that. So we have a sort of a set of things that we tend to do every week that we have itemized, like posting on social media or writing blog posts and stuff like that. We also have some other stuff that we're trying to do, but maybe don't do so regularly, like get Backdrop posted on other websites or create YouTube videos or things that can be shared that aren't on our own properties. And then we have, person-to-person outreach, like going to events, which obviously doesn't reach as many people at once, but often tends to leave a stronger impression. And so those are kind of the areas we've been focused on so far. But again, like there's a whole lot more out there that we're not aware that we don't know what we don't know. So if you see anything where you're like, why isn't Backdrop community doing X? It's probably just because we haven't thought of it. So feel free to jump in. Okay, so from last week, we have a lot of like exciting things going on in the PMC, but the PMC members don't seem to be having very much time to write blog posts, with the exception of Tim, who wrote a fantastic blog post, which I can't wait to get out. I was looking over it today. It looks really great. But we have 2 other blog posts that we need to get out first. First of all, we want to write a blog post mentioning that Tim's on the PMC before we have Tim writing a blog post from the perspective of a PMC member. We think that would probably be the right order to do that. And then I'm not really sure if we need to get Nate's post out between those 2, but it had been on our list to have Nate write this blog post for like a year, and he's finally written it. And now it's blocked by this other blog post about adding our new PMC members. So we're not very good at writing content, it turns out. But I have some time today. So hopefully I'll check and see what Jack's been up to, because Jack offered to write the post last week because I didn't have time last week, but I have time this week, so I'll see if I can get it done, if they haven't done it already. We have social media stuff that Tim has mostly been managing. I don't know if you want to give us an update on that or ask any questions.
Well, I think as always, any feedback that are people watching the Backdrop Twitter feed, if you have any feedback or ideas of something we should be doing, I go a bit in spurts. I think we've been getting at least a couple of Twitter posts out per week, sometimes more. And I don't know, I feel like it's a reasonable amount. We could do better. Better other content, having more like blog posts to tweet about would be great.
Yeah.
What is our official, is there like a blog post policy? Do people get access to the blog by asking for it, or?
In general, anyone who has an account on backdropcms.org can write a blog post. By default, they end up unpublished, and somebody is supposed to review them every Thursday. And if the content is, quality content that we think is valuable to our audience, then we'll schedule it. And ideally, the reason was that we wouldn't get a bunch of blog posts coming out like the same week. We could sort of stagger them, do sort of one a week sort of thing. But we've been getting some content that needs like edits, which sometimes the people who've written it don't really have the experience to be able to make the content super relevant to a Backdrop audience. So like we had somebody who wrote up, was a content author and really wanted to write content for Backdrop. And they were like, I love Backdrop, I use it all the time, I want to write something, I'm going to write a blog post on like hosting options. But then they weren't really familiar with like how to put Backdrop on different kinds of hosts, or like what the different kinds of hosts meant. And so there's a post that's like, it's very technical, but I'm not sure it's valuable in the same way to our readers. Like, I'm not sure they need that education, whereas they probably like need to know, where do I put my Backdrop site? And if they wanted to read an article on hosting, that's what they would expect. So I asked, like, could we maybe add something to it that was like, if you want shared hosting, here are some options, or point them to a page on our site where they can get them. So if they don't want that information, they don't have to get it. But that became very hard and kind of a blocker for getting that article done. And then we have another one that somebody was like, oh, I have all of this experience in like search engine optimization and I want to write an article on that. But that ended up not being like Backdrop specific enough. Like we have a bunch of tools like the image styles, right? Where they were like, you should make your thumbnails smaller. And I'm like, could you just add something in here about how we have this feature like built into Core and it'll do it for you automatically? And he was like, I don't really know how to do that. And I was like, okay. So it's a lot of really like, I think, well-meaning people who just don't have experience in the right areas to be able to make those posts compelling in the way that I think we would like to have. And then we have on the other end of the spectrum, a lot of really technical people who want to write, like Jeff wrote a post on like how to run Backdrop on Composer. And I'm like, well, that is fantastic, but that's also not really the audience we're trying to reach. Like people like Jeff will share that information and it'll be fantastic, but 90% of the people who are running Backdrop aren't going to want to use Backdrop with Composer. So it's just, we're trying to have a hard time like filling the middle gap where like we need good content and people are starting with Backdrop who need information and we don't really have it. So I think we've had this idea recently that every decision the project management committee makes should come with a blog post. So we also have this backlog of like more general blog posts that need to be written, like, hey, we added security as one of our principles last year. That would be a really good blog post that could be non-technical and relevant to everyone, whether you're new to Backdrop or a core developer or core committer, whatever, and kind of spans all groups. But yeah, so I think as far as I still want to accept the blog posts from the people who are well-meaning and want to try, but I think they need a little bit more hand-holding, and it's hard to have, like, we don't have anyone who sort of has the time to do that and be like, hey, this article is fantastic. We did, I think it was like a couple years ago, we had one person. We also have to be really careful that like, you don't want to over edit because you want to make sure the article still is in their voice. And we had a marketing agency who helped write our newsletters who reviewed some blog posts that we had drafted for us and tried to like rewrite it to be in a consistent like Backdrop CMS voice. But the problem was that the people who write the blog posts get discouraged when they feel like their work has been modified too much, like it's not theirs anymore. And so trying to get that delicate balance of like, we want to help you make good content, but we don't want to like write it for you because that wouldn't, it's very hard. So we need someone who has time and experience and the understanding of like nuance and how to do that. And it just hasn't happened. So we have a lot of blog posts that are in draft state. But yeah, Tim, I would think if you know anyone who wants to write blog posts, or if you want to write more blog posts or whatever, helping us figure out how to solve those problems would be good. So
Yeah, we need an executive editor. That's a tough position to fill.
Yeah, especially when the content range is such, spectrums. Like you need an executive editor who can understand the stuff Jeff writes about running Backdrop on Composer, and like understands what different hosting providers might provide. It's like a technical executive editor who can write in a voice that applies to everyone of every, it's just a very hard thing to do.
Who has available time and is willing to work for free? Like it's really a purple unicorn.
Yeah. So.
But may I ask a question?
Yes.
Regarding the target group? You might have discussed it before. I wasn't there in the meetings, but did you define that? Because I wrote a blog post, a long blog post about Backdrop CMS 2 years ago, targeted to people like me, small audiences, and end of life of Drupal 7, what's next? What should I do? Should I change to platform A, B, C, whatever? And I had tremendous feedback on that blog post.
Yeah, we had,
because I had some sorry, last sentence. I had some special kind of people in mind when writing that in German. I'm not a native English speaker, of course.
Okay, so we did one meeting. I just checked; it was on February 6th, where the entire focus of the outreach meeting was on defining our audience. I think, who are our possible audiences? How are we reaching out to each of those audiences? What's working? What tools are we using?
Okay.
How do we reach the people we're not yet reaching, who we've identified as being our audience? And then we had like a section on what do we want to accomplish in the next year?
Okay, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah, here, let me share this link. I'm gonna post it in Gitter, or wait, what is this called? Zulip.
I can send me later.
Okay, I can also put it in this chat if I can find the chat button. So we did have that conversation. I feel like it was sort of, we left it almost unfinished. Like, I'm not sure we're, like we talked about it, but I'm not sure it's changed anything we're doing, which I don't know. I don't know if it should have. I think it was kind of just talking about what we're doing now, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know how to take that information and turn it into anything actionable. So maybe we need help in that area.
I've got it.
So, okay.
Oh, looks great. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So if you want to read through that and see if you see anything that stands out,
sure,
that would be fantastic.
Cool.
And I mean, the context for that discussion was that was sort of it was a planning meeting for the year, and we sort of started to brainstorm and dump a bunch of ideas. But Jen's right, we didn't follow up with it.
Yeah.
There were no action steps. We didn't actually set priorities. So I think we could still do a phase 2 of that at any time.
Yeah, this looks great. This looks great. Wow.
I go a bit back and forth between, I mean, the kinds of things that I think help solve this problem are, one, to get the CiviCRM thing taken care of. I mean, I think it would be great to have people be able to volunteer and say their interest is in helping with the blog, and for us to know who those people are, right? Right now, Jen, you might have a handful of people in your head that you know are interested in that, or some of us might show up at the meeting, but there isn't any place that I know of where we have a list of people who've said, hey, I'm interested in the blog. And I think it would maybe be easier for a volunteer, like that kind of editorial role might be easier for someone to take on if they knew, oh, here are the group of people that are interested in that I can call on to help me. You know, I could even envision every other week or once a month an editorial meeting where people really just sit down and like actually work on getting those blog posts taken care of. But I'm really hesitant to suggest new meetings because we have enough of those already. And I don't want it, you know, to me, a new meeting would be great if we could get new people to come to it, not if it's the same people going to another meeting. That's not helpful.
Yeah.
But to me, the first step is to get the Civi CRM thing going. Like, let's track our volunteers and be able to print up a list of who's interested in helping with what, and be able to reach out to them rather than just waiting for them to show up at a meeting, which we don't really do a great job of communicating either, right? So.
Mhm.
Would it change things if instead of calling them meetings, if you called them sprints? Because it sounded like there were two things that felt like sprints. It felt like there's occasional need for an outreach sprint, and I feel like there's a need for a Civi CRM sprint to get it going, because it's been spinning wheels for a while now.
Yeah. I think the problem with the Civi CRM things, I don't think a sprint will do any good, because we need the one person who knows how to do it to have time to do it. And setting up a sprint with like 10 people who have time but don't know what to do or like how to do it doesn't accomplish anything.
Well, I'll push back on that just a little bit. First of all, I don't care if it's a meeting or a sprint, but something focused on that could be helpful. I'm not worried about 10 people showing up. If we got 3 or 4, that would be great.
Yeah. I just don't want 4 people sitting around going, well, what are we going to do? We can't do the thing we need to do. So
that would be true if that's true. But if that's true, why is that true? In the sense that, like, I feel like I could probably, I don't have a lot of the Civi CRM experience, but I feel like I could dig in and work on Civi CRM. I've seen it before. I've gotten into the interface before, but I don't even know like where it is, or, you know, I mean, like how it's being hosted, right? So that is the thing we need taken care of. Right, is if we have an installation and you know, Luke and I can actually get in and work on it. I don't think there isn't one magical person out there that we need to be there.
Well, we need the person who knows how to add Civi CRM to backdropcms.org to do it, like without breaking backdropcms.org.
So we're not talking about a fresh installation, a new site. We're talking about adding it to. So
that we have all of our current people in there. Yeah, so that's where it gets tricky, where like we had an empty Civi CRM site before, but like what's the use of a user database with no users in it? Like, so that was one thing. And then how do you even architect it in a way that's valuable for what we want to get out of it? You sort of need to have someone who understands, okay, first of all, what we want to get out of it, which is a little amorphous even to us, but also like based on the needs of our organization, what are things from their experience with Civi would really work? And so having a firm that like works with Civi and works with nonprofits to be able to like have that, okay, we're gonna remove all these 18 features from Civi that aren't gonna do you any good and add these 4 that aren't in core that you're gonna need. And that like sort of experience is something that I think, I know I don't have. I think that our team is missing, and having Palante involved in that, I think, is going to be huge. And so that's kind of where we're stuck right now, is that they're also really busy right now. And so trying to get, and they're like, we want to help. And it's like, I don't want you to help. I don't know. So yeah, I feel like I agree. It would be great to have Civi. I also think there's probably other things we can do without Civi, like based on the fact that we have a mailing list. Well, in theory, we have a mailing list. Yep. Yeah, I don't really know like if Civi is actually a blocker. I feel like if we had it, would we know what to do with it? I don't know. Maybe if they told us, maybe Tim, you played with it for a while, you'd figure out how to like collect the right data.
Yeah, I mean, to me, my first step would be just to install it and to start. I mean, I have ideas already about what I would like to get out of it, right? The main thing for me is a list where we can have anybody who's volunteered and sort of categories, right? And I suspect that's not going to be hard to figure out in Civi. And so as long as I can track contact information, who the person is and what they do, I think you're right that we don't necessarily even need Civi for that. And Civi could be stage 2, right? We could do this in a spreadsheet, but we have to make that decision, right? So
Yeah.
to just start gathering that information and having it available, and then it could be ported into a spreadsheet later or into Civi once we get it set up.
Yeah.
Or I could see just going with a fresh Civi install as sort of a prototype for us to play with and experiment.
Yeah.
And even use temporarily with the idea that then again, at some point we'll have to migrate the data if we get it hooked up the way we really want it.
So this is a problem I've studied a lot, which doesn't necessarily mean I'm good at it, but at least I've looked at it. And what I'm feeling is that we have a lot of requirements attached to this, and we should look carefully at those requirements and see if we're not slowing it down with one or more things that aren't strictly needed for that. I mean, one example that just sort of jumped out, and I don't, maybe this would have to be, but the idea of it being tied to the existing backdropcms.org website strikes me as a difficult thing, because it makes it much less disposable. It means that there's much greater danger of breaking something if things go awry than if it was an independent thing. I mean, when I first mentioned, CRM, I don't know, like maybe 2 years ago, I suggested using Salesforce, because as a nonprofit, we can get a Salesforce installation for free. And it seemed reasonable. I mean, Civi is one of perhaps our best partner in this. So if we can use them, I mean, that's a huge win. But it's not huge enough if it actually stops us. So as just sort of a straw man proposal, maybe the idea of setting up a non-integrated Civi CRM installation, if nothing else, so that Tim and I could just fuck with it.
Yeah, well, you guys can do that. No, I mean, there's nothing stopping you from doing that right now. Setting it up that integrates with backdropcms.org, that was also something that was not on our roadmap, but after having the initial meeting with the folks at Palante, they were like, oh no, you definitely need to have it hooked up with your current website, or you're going to have to deal with a bunch of problems that come from people doing things on your main website and not getting recorded in your Civi instance. So it's just sort of that this will make our long-term maintenance integration headache less painful, rather than I don't know, it was advice from the people who know best. So that's how it ended up on our list. But there is nothing to stop us from doing a standalone instance, as you recommended, even with sample data, take the user table from the backdropcms.org sanitized database and throw it in and just see what we can get out of it. And I think that that's a good place to start. I mean, if we're not doing anything else, which looks like we're not. But I also don't want, I don't want the tool to get in the way of the goal.
Yeah.
And so I think thinking too much about we can't do anything because we don't have a tool, regardless of what that tool is also maybe the wrong way of thinking about it. We should be okay, well, what is the goal? And if we can get to the goal of the spreadsheet, like Tim recommended, that's a perfectly fine thing to do. We don't need a Salesforce and we don't need a Civi, though they might be better. It shouldn't stop us from getting a list of people who've been to Backdrop events, or a list of people who've made donations or whatever. We have all this data, we just need to figure out what we need and put it someplace where we can get at it. So
was it really possible to add some fields to the user profile?
Yeah, we have been doing that, and we can continue doing that. Yeah. So
yeah, actually that, well, okay. That could be a good temporary solution, is just to have some behind the scenes fields that we can, where we can add a note to a user. The downside is that there would be a few more of us making content changes to the site, but I don't know if that's a problem.
Yeah, I think another thing too is that once we do get Civi hooked up, all those fields will be coming from the city side. And so there will be a little bit more migration in terms of like copying the data from where
But
we have it to where we want it.
It's no worse than a spreadsheet, is it?
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, with a spreadsheet, it feels like you probably just have to do like one import. But if we're storing the data in both places, that could be tricky. And maybe we just export it all in. I don't know. I have no idea how this works.
I'm okay with it. Yeah, I'm not pushing that idea strongly. It just occurred to me it's another option, right?
Yeah.
Spreadsheet is,
Yeah, here, couldn't we pull a feed from the existing site? If, when people create users, just like, oh, there it is in our feed. We add that, we import that on the fly.
Yeah, in theory, it would have to be private because it's user data, but yeah. I don't know. I don't really know
Right.
how Pixivy is designed to do that.
Tim,
I have no idea.
why don't you and I prototype this? Why don't we say,
Yep.
let me throw out like an arbitrary mini project. By 2 weeks from now, Tim and I will have tried to set up our own Civic CRM setup and have either succeeded or failed, but one way or the other will be done in 2 weeks.
well, Luke,
And
let's
yeah.
even make it more general. We'll try to prototype something.
Yeah.
And if the CVCR thing isn't going to happen, we can prototype a spreadsheet.
Can you
all
also
right.
start with like a goal?
Yeah.
So it's not just like, let's set up a database, but like, we need to figure out who does X or whatever you're after.
Sure. I mean,
Okay.
yeah, my draft goal right off the top is that we just have a master list of people and how they are willing to contribute and contact information,
Okay.
right, that we can access. And we can refine that a bit and make it clearer, but
Okay.
nobody has
and
any, does that make sense?
yes. Can you also define like, how do you know if somebody's willing to contribute? Like, is it based on what they've done currently? Like, because we're starting with like, we don't have any checkboxes with values in them, but we
Right.
have this data somehow.
Right.
And then we can maybe even like, regardless of whatever the tool is, I could get you data sets of whatever that is based on, we have a spreadsheet of people who contribute to our Indiegogo campaign that isn't anywhere other than like on my computer, right? Which needs to end up somewhere else. So yeah, just stuff like that.
Yeah, we believe we're wasting resources somewhere. We want to try to like get a handle on what we might be not taking advantage of and try to leverage that better.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Yay, I'm excited that we figured out how to make progress on this.
And as soon as Palenti hears about this, they're going to find time.
That's okay, because we'll be ready.
It's absolutely okay. Luke and I are going to scare them, and like we don't want to trust those guys with this. So
I don't think that's it.
Oh yeah, no,
We're going to pull the data.
This is the classic management technique for engineers. Is you ask an engineer to do something like, no, I can't do it. It's like, okay, I'll ask Jack. He's good at technical things, and like suddenly they spring into action.
Yeah, I've heard that exact same thing about like, if you want a new logo, make one yourself and show it to a friend who's a graphic designer.
okay.
Okay,
Next.
that's fantastic. That wasn't even on the agenda, but I'm really glad we talked about it. Do you want to talk, Luke, about theme examples?
Yeah. I mean, this is a project I'm actually trying to take care of myself, but it's always good to have it out there to keep that going along. But sort of the thing I'm working on is ultimately the end product is a one-button demo for themes, and the path to get there, if I'm not mistaken, is 4 steps. I'm creating a simple prototype site based upon my prototypical coffee shop that I envisioned a while back. I want to make like this fake coffee shop site, turn it into a backdrop installation profile, and set it up so that it can be launched from Tugboat, and include in that a theme switcher so that the coffee shop site can, whoever hits the Tugboat thing can switch between a couple themes to get the idea of, oh, that's what a theme is. And also to provide a little impetus to like similar to the example we just talked about of making a bad logo, so that what the ideal thing is that somebody looks at me and is like, oh my god, these things are crap, I could do something better than this in 10 minutes, so that they do. And so that we have better things to fill it up with. So whether that last step happens or not, I'm not really sure. But the first 4 steps all seem totally straightforward and plausible, and I have time and some motivation, so I'm going to try to do it. So
Well,
that's that idea.
I think that I still have a hard time wrapping my head around because of the way the layouts are separate from themes. I haven't tried something like this before, and so I don't know how easy it is to apply the same theme to different content, that's been set up a different way, right? To me, there's you make decisions about your layout that go with your theme. And now that these are separate, if you just switch themes, you're sticking with the same layout. And I don't know how that's going to work. And I think it's going to be a really interesting experiment.
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as all of our themes use core layouts, it should be a non-issue. It gets tricky when people start introducing custom layouts. But
Sure.
I mean, even if you look at the way themes had been built in the last 5 years, there's a layout CSS style sheet usually that's separate from everything else that handles columns and stuff like that. Right. So the CSS has already been separated in terms of, I don't know, not every theme, but Zen and all these base themes, they always are the layout is not the same as the style. And so we've just done that in a much more rigid way. It's not only are you not putting this CSS in the same file, but you can't, it comes from a completely different source. But the reason they've done that is so that you could throw out that CSS style sheet for layout and throw in another one for a different layout and use a different grid system or whatever you want. So it should be possible. I'm really curious because I have, I think 2 contrib themes that do support all 10 core layouts to see what would happen if I threw them on. And I have a tarball of here's all of the core layouts with placeholder content in them. That would probably be something we could throw on to your sample site, Luke, where we could figure out legitimate dummy content that might be relevant to your coffee thing. But at least you'd have a starting point for all themes need to look good with all 10 of these layouts. And then if we find them what isn't, we'd be okay, here's a pain point. So that way, if people are doing the demo site and they change the layout, it still looks good.
Yeah, I think once if I manage to get through this basic thing, it can be branched out in a variety of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Before there can be other sample contents, there could be sample layouts, there can be other things, and we get to find out how modular it really is.
Yeah.
I mean, theoretically it should work, but it's good to go into a laboratory and see if your theories are correct.
I really want to work on this too, Luke. You're getting me excited. I wish there were more hours. You know what this means?
That's what I studied. I got a graduate degree. What they teach in MBA is how to get other people to do stuff because you're not doing it.
Okay.
And the most straightforward way is to pay them, of course. But
you don't have that option.
Inspiration also is one of the things we actually studied. All right, so that's the theme tester idea. And for what it's worth, that the thing I'm looking at is I think the source of the famous Drupal cliff, because Drupal was originally very much this hacker thing, and as people built onto it, they made pieces of it easy. But there was always this core of expert stuff that nobody was talked about because the people that understood it totally understood it and thought it was very basic, and people who didn't understand had no idea what it was and couldn't find it, and suddenly hit some point where they're like, I can't figure out how to get from here to there, and here to there usually involved learning the gigantic API and all the history, and I've worked on 100 different Drupal projects that have used this, and that's not practical for somebody coming into it from the outside. And now that I've been doing it for 10 years, I've got that same disease. There's got to be things that I've managed to unfortunately learn. So I don't know that they're hard.
I'm hoping that Tim's class is going to help us with that. Tim is going to learn firsthand all of the really terrible things people have to figure out when starting to use Backdrop.
So let me comment on that since you brought it up, Jen. I was thinking about it anyways. I had a class, session 1, and I've got 2 students to start with, and I'm hoping it'll grow. And for those who aren't familiar, I just started off for a class, how to build a site with Backdrop, and it's targeted at like site builders. And the 2 people are both like, both of them have Drupal experience. Neither of them consider themselves coders at all, PHP. They have miscellaneous degrees of comfort with theming. But even, like I asked, I think one of them hasn't used views at all yet, despite having played with Drupal. The other one's like, yeah, I know the basics of views. So anyways, they're kind of basic site builders. The one guy, I brought up the blog earlier because he's written a blog post that might be good for backdrop.org. It's about, he was the one who contacted me about a couple months ago about a video I did saying, you're using all this jargon that people don't understand. And you need a really basic intro. I don't know. Anyways, both of these guys have spent a fair amount of time actually researching options, and they really like the idea of Backdrop as a tool for them, despite, sort of where they're at skill-wise. And I think Backdrop should be for them, but I do think that there are some obstacles in their way. And the class hopefully will help uncover those, and hopefully we'll fix some of them. If at the very worst, we'll provide better training material. So.
We got off a little track from Theme Switcher, but Luke, I love your idea.
Yeah, no, that's all part of it. The whole idea is to try to find potential customers who we're not reaching, and find barriers that don't have to be there, that we can lower without having to work too hard to do that. Just that we didn't notice they were there.
Okay. What next?
So
I could spin into. You want to do my other one, or is there a
yeah,
different
as I
thing?
was thinking, we've only got 8 minutes left, so let's just touch on the ease of upgrade point you brought in earlier.
Yeah.
Then,
Yeah, well, so I mean, from my perspective, there's 2 obvious sources of Backdrop customers. And the most obvious one is stems from the founding forking, right? That Drupal decided to abandon this gigantic, incredibly well debugged and very, very functional core to go off and do something different, which good for them. But from our perspective, it's like, holy cow, look at this. 1 million lines of well debugged functional code that no one's using. Okay, let's try to do something with that. So that's like the core thing that we have to work with. And kind of the obvious opening there is that the Drupal project is about to abandon at some point. I keep pushing it off, but at some point the roadmap is to abandon all this old code base and move on and no longer support it. And you've got literally millions of websites out there where people put a huge amount of effort into getting this stuff to work, that are gonna have that don't necessarily want to be unsupported. So if we can invite them into us, that's a huge reservoir of potential resources. And I just discovered kind of recently, I mean, I always knew, just because of architectural reasons, that it should be easier to get from Drupal 7 to Backdrop. But I had been assuming that Drupal would put more effort into getting them to Drupal 8 than they have. In particular, I was astonished to discover last week that there's no plan to to support views from one thing to the other. The official recommended process is make them yourself by hand, which just seems nuts. And maybe the underlying architecture for them has changed so much, but with our case, I mean, we do that, right? We translate Drupal 7 views to backdrop views, and I mean that right there saves the planet like 1 billion hours of developer time. You know, that is $100 billion advantage.
Yeah.
That's like somebody gave us $100 billion.
I think one thing to think about though is that like the audience for Drupal 8 are not people who are upgrading from Drupal 7 in the same way that our audience is. Like we're after people who want exactly the same site when they're done as when they started. Whereas with Drupal 8, they're rebuilding the site anyway. They just want some of their content. And so I think the majority of people aren't going to use the same views because they've already changed their content types. They've like re-architected the way that their site's built. And so the number of people like you and me who are like, I don't want to rebuild that view over. I'm not going to change my data architecture because then I'd have to change my view. Like it's much easier for us to just be like import it into Backdrop and run it the way it is. But for the kinds of like enterprise projects are constantly shifting, like the website changes all the time. There just isn't a very large percentage of people in the audience they're after now that care about that $1 billion like you and I do. Like they're spending that anyway. They might as well spend it on something new. We don't have $1 billion.
Yeah. We don't have to beat anybody. We don't need like a big percentage of it. If we just get a tiny percentage of that, if we could get 1% of Drupal 7 sites to switch to Backdrop, that's a massive flood of resources in our direction that is super useful. And then, you know, I would say sort of the other thing is my ambitions for this are sort of bigger because one of the things that Drupal could have gotten but never really did is all the WordPress users who, you know, try to like shoehorn into WordPress things that Drupal does and Backdrop by extension does naturally. All, you know, the information architecture stuff, the taxonomies and fields and views. I mean, all these like fundamental features that we take for granted are really hard in WordPress, and everybody wants them, and they do all sorts of crazy crap to like try to shoehorn it into it, whereas it's easy for us. So at some point, I'd like to open that spigot up and get that influx of energy and resources into our world. But initially, just capitalizing on the fact that upgrades from Drupal to Drupal 7 to Backdrop are so much easier. They're just a little bit of tuning. Again, you know, low hanging fruit, not like major reworks of stuff. Just, you know, could just be documentation and simply, you know, a few how-tos, and you can kind of turn this on. How much more time do I have?
2 minutes.
All right. So there is another piece that I've actually started working on myself, and again, this is, you know, we'll see how much of it completed, but a project that I've been working on, a coding project, is I've been working on Drupal 8 migrate module. Why, you might wonder? What does that have to do with anything? Drupal 8 migrate module migrates Drupal 7 sites to Drupal 8. Drupal 7 is close enough to Backdrop that I've been able to twiddle a little bit to migrate Backdrop sites to Drupal 8. The value proposition there is to remove the fear of lockout, which I would assume all the Drupal 7 sites that I'm trying to collect here would have. They're like, oh my God, you know, what if this platform dies and I'm in it? What happens next? So if we can convincingly say, you know, come on in because there's a nice exit door. Like if you come into Backdrop and you decide that you regret that, here's the path to Drupal 8. Our best wishes, no worries. I think actually, if both of these things come together, they'll find that the easiest way to migrate to Drupal 8 would be to migrate via Backdrop. You go to Backdrop, your views get translated. And I guess that won't translate to Drupal 8, so maybe that's not really correct. But I have a thought of how you can fix that. I mean, the exports. I mean, do we convert views to CMI in Backdrop? I think that's the hard part. I think once it's in CMI, then you can get it to Drupal 8.
Well, so our CMI and their CMI is different. So that's
JSON versus YAML.
YAML.
Right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure, like, I think if all it was taking the PHP and exporting it to YAML, they would have done it. I think there's probably some underlying architectural change in views that made that not possible in the same way that it was possible for us to do it. And I don't know what that is, but my
Yeah.
instinct is that like our views upgrade path, Nate did it in like a day. Like it really
Yeah.
wasn't that hard. And I think that it just can't have been that easy for them and they didn't do it. There's got to be
Like-
something tricky where they were like, too hard.
like why wouldn't Moish have thought of that?
Yeah, I don't think it was like not considered at all. I think it was thought about and they were like, it's a lot of work. So
Alright. But I mean, I was actually on the D8 migration committee for a brief period of time. I went to a dozen meetings and got to know them.
Mhm.
I didn't stick it out, but at the time they seemed to be really focused on a lot of the edge cases. And from my perspective, you could 80-20 rule. You could be like, all right, well, screw the edge cases. You know, get most of it. But I'm not sure that happened.
well, that's how Backdrop operates.
Yeah.
So you're in the right place. Okay, we're out of time. Does anyone else want to add anything else before we drop off and switch to developer meeting?
Just one line plug, the CMS Philly that I put in the chat notes. That used to be Drupadelphia. They've changed to CMS. They had it's going to do a virtual conference like May 1st, I think.
Nice.
And so they've got this broad CMS theme. I think it would be really great if we had a presence there, and they extended the deadline from April 1st to April 8th for talks. So if anybody wants to collaborate on putting some talks together, I think we should submit some stuff.
Yeah,
Interesting.
sounds great.
What was attendance? You did Stanford camp, didn't you, John?
Yeah.
Did
I think
it
it
go
was
well?
it was pretty good. So I went to, I don't know, 4 sessions in the morning and then mine was in the afternoon, and there were maybe 15 people in every session I was in the Zoom list anyway. And so I don't know, I know they also were going to post them all to YouTube. So I don't know if they did that live or not. And there could have been people watching and not in the meetings. I think maybe they didn't. I think that was coming later. But they had 4 sessions at every slot, 3 or 4 in every slot. So that's pretty good. That means, you know, if there are 15 people times there's 45 people in any hour. I don't know. I thought it was better attended than I was expecting. So
If we got some sessions into CMS Philly, that could be just a really logical place for us to promote Backdrop people to go.
yeah,
Even more so than a Drupal event, right? Because
Yep.
it's general.
I'd like to do that. Let's I'll ping you on Zulip and we can talk about
Okay.
what we should present on or collaborate, however.
Right.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and wrap up this meeting and we will start the next one shortly. So see many of you in a moment.
Okay,
Morning.
Bye.
come on.